Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. So now I'm trying to answer more of your questions, and this was a good question we got here. Somebody wrote in and said, I feel like setting boundaries is unempathic. I was told by my family and in some other relationships I was in that setting boundaries is rigid, and it's really just me being difficult. So what's the right answer? Ooh, boundaries. Everyone talks about boundaries like it's so easy, right? I don't even think boundaries are a thing in narcissistic relationship. So what's a boundary, right? A boundary is personal sovereignty, right? It is holding a line around something that matters to you, to keep a relationship feeling safe and comfortable. The more healthy and agreeable people are in relationships, the better boundaried the relationships are in an effortless way, right? There's a person's a softer touch. So an example of a boundary could even be, in some ways, there's all kinds of ways. So one boundary could be a person saying, please don't call after 7 o'clock at night. That's when I spend time with my children. A boundary might be, please don't talk about that topic. It's too painful for me. A boundary could be how much time someone spends with you. But a boundary is it's sort of something that it's a way that a person can again maintain their sense of self in a relationship, and in healthy relationships can communicate that, and then that boundary's honored. And it's not to say that boundary relationships are always easy, or boundary conversations are always easy. They're really not. And even in the healthiest of friendships, a boundary conversation can be fraught, it can be uncomfortable. And yeah, if you're setting a boundary, there's a decent chance you might even be viewed as being difficult or demanding, or just, like demandy and asky and all of that, right? Now, in normal, healthy relationships, like I said, boundaries are often quite organic. If you have a friend who, for example, is struggling financially, you might then even hold back to say, I don't think I'm going to tell them about this raise I just got. It doesn't feel good when they're struggling, right? So you, in the most elegant dance, in a way that need to ostensibly set boundaries, isn't there as much. Because when you have healthy people interacting with each other, there's an anticipation, there's an empathy. The greater the empathy, often the less there needs to be this sort of formal boundary setting, right? So in normal relationships, even when it's difficult, even when the boundary's uncomfortable, even when you have to tell someone something they don't want to hear in terms of your time with them or anything like that, healthy relationships will sort of get back on their feet strongly. Boundaries in narcissistic relationships, forget about it. It's not even a thing. Interestingly, many narcissistic people demand their boundaries be, you're violating my boundary, that's my boundary. So narcissistic people will use the boundary language quite often. If, however, you attempt to institute a boundary and it is at all at odds with a narcissistic person's agenda, selfishness, wants, needs, any of it, they ain't honoring it. If for any reason your boundary is not something that would affect them, then they probably won't care. But that's not honoring a boundary. That just happens that the boundary you set is just not something that affects their selfish needs. But one of the big challenges is that so many people in narcissistic relationships hear this advice like, you just need to set a boundary. This relationship would be okay if you just could learn to set a boundary. And it never works. And so people in these relationships often are made to feel actually quite foolish, because they're like, well, this is you. This is on you. You're weak. You couldn't set a boundary with them. That's why they're running roughshod all over you. That's not true. For lots of folks, they will say that early in a narcissistic relationship, they did attempt to set a boundary. They did attempt to make known what makes them uncomfortable. And we're often met with gaslighting, minimization, or we're told that they were being demanding or difficult or sensitive. And in the early phase of a relationship, where you may be invested in this relationship working out. If you like this person, you can see how very quickly in a narcissistic relationship, a person is almost trained to kind of pull back on their boundaries. But this ongoing belief that if a person has a boundary, that they're being difficult is a very universal sort of experience in a narcissistic relationship. So what that ends up happening is, let's start from the beginning. People who grow up in narcissistic family systems almost never get to learn what boundaries are about because they don't exist in narcissistic family systems. There's an intrusiveness that narcissistic parents have even when they're neglectful. And it's sort of interesting because the neglect of a narcissistic family system is that the narcissistic parent can almost be bothered with all the minutia of child rearing, teaching a kid how to tie their shoes or, other healthy behaviors or any of that. There, the parents almost can't be bothered. But when they feel entitled to their child's life. So whether the child wants it or not, the parent will ask them probing questions or make comments about their activities or make comments about their weight and shape or aspects of their life or their friends or any of it. So it's almost constant open season on you when you have a narcissistic parent. And a child is often not in a position to be able to set a boundary. And I can promise you this. If a child attempted to set a boundary in a narcissistic relationship, they would be told they were selfish, that they were greedy, that they were ungrateful for all that's done for them, it could even escalate to straight up verbal abuse or even physical abuse. How dare you stand up to your parent? In a healthy family system where the parent's not narcissistic, there would be more of an honoring of a natural boundary between a child, or a child could express like, I don't like that, and the parent would honor that, right? So when the child learns that their voice matters, they're in a great position to be able to set boundaries. Well, that's never going to happen if you're in a narcissistic system. You basically learn to shut parts of yourself off, or you realize boundaries aren't a thing and that you just have to go with it. And that you just don't even learn that this is something you can get. And the other thing you learn, because many people go through this when they have narcissistic parents or families of origin, is that if you do really set that boundary and you kind of double down on it and you try to do it again with a narcissistic parent, what will happen is the narcissistic parent may become sullen. They may give the child the silent treatment. And I've worked with many clients who had said the way my parent managed this with me was if I made something known that I didn't want, like I didn't want to do something they wanted to do, I didn't want to join them on an errand, the parent would become sullen and petulant and brooding and quiet. And they remember as a child feeling guilty that they hurt their parents' feeling by basically saying, no, I don't want to, or I'd like to do this by myself. And so boundary setting gets associated with guilt or with being a bad person or with being selfish. So when that's the lesson taken into adulthood, good luck with that. So this person who says, I feel like setting boundaries is unempathic, that to me, I have to tell you, is sort of a ringer for like, yikes. Where did this message come from? And I would guess it probably came from a family of origin. I've also gotten the pushback from folks who say, well, listen, in some cultures, there's a lot more family enmeshment. Everyone's into each other's business. Okay, and I'm sure that takes a toll on the people in those cultures as they attempt to, again, individuate. So just because something happens in a culture, it really depends on how much a person either feels like A, it's distressing, or B, do they feel supported by that system? So a person might say, yeah, it is intrusive. However, I do feel safe enough in this system that if it really mattered, I would be able to pull back. And so in those cases where there is empathy, where there is compassion, where there is safety, and where there is love, a kind of like maybe overly enthusiastic family system might feel like something that's more navigatable than when those things are not there. Basically, it's the entitlement a family has to you as a human being, and that you're basically an object that's there that they can interact with any which way that they want. So this sense then that you learn is when you are from those family systems, and listen, I come from a culture where that kind of familial enmeshment is present, doesn't make it okay. And I'm saying that as someone who comes from one of those cultures. Is that you get this sense that to set a boundary makes you the bad person, makes you the one who's lacking empathy. Who the hell is going to set boundaries under those conditions? So the person who's asking this question, to set a boundary is always going to be a fraught space. And what it does mean then is that I always tell folks, start with the internal boundaries you can set. Pay attention to how you feel. And if something doesn't feel good, say, okay, I am not going to change their behavior, but I could change how I interact with this. I'm going to give a personal example on this one. I had recently been in a circumstance, because I grew up in a circumstance where it's like setting boundaries is unempathic. It's very much part of the culture. It was reinforced in relationships I had. So I very much resonated with this person's question. But I was recently in a situation. And remember what I said? First time something happens, it happens. Second time's a coincidence. Third time's a pattern. It was literally that. It was a third time situation. And I was in this situation, and what was happening, again, didn't feel good. But the third time, it really, really didn't feel good. And I thought to myself, I could either school this person, which wouldn't feel good, and I could tell by how antagonistic this person was. They would shut me down. They would humiliate me. They would gaslight me, and I just wasn't in the mood. Or, and this happened to be I was interacting with a place of business, I could stop taking my business there. And I opted for that. And that was actually, for me, I'm such a natural fawner that I'm like, ooh, really? Do I have the right to do this? And where I knew that my boundary setting skills had made progress was, yeah, you do. That did not feel safe. That did not feel good. That was not okay. And I am never going there again. Those people will never know why I'm not coming back. They will never, ever know why I'm never coming back, and I'm never giving them another cent of my money. I will not put myself in that kind of a situation again, right? I can promise you, much like this person said in this question, setting boundaries is rigid, it's a person being difficult. If I had said to them, let me tell you all the reasons I am not coming back to your place of business, because you did this, because you did this, because you did this, because you did this, they would have given me some, I'm sorry you feel that way kind of nonsense, which frankly would have felt worse. But within me, the capacity to detect, like, this is not cool and this is not okay, and I've been here 3 times, and each time it's gotten a little bit worse, I'm good. I don't need to do this again. Some of you might be saying, oh, but how are they going to learn? How are they going to change? I ain't their teacher. I don't care. This is not it's not my problem. And so for someone like this, is that starting with that internal boundary setting, like, I don't like how this feels. I'm going to take a step back. And I did do that until the point where I'm like, okay, this is getting worse. I need to be done with this. So it doesn't mean that you're just packing up the show and cutting bait every time, but it might be like, ooh, this is not okay. Let me watch this. Let me be curious about this. Let me explore this within myself. What doesn't feel good here? You could even try to make a sort of a small, and in fact, in this third circumstance with this business, this time I did try. The first 2 times I didn't try to communicate. The third time I did, and that's when I got shut down. And that's when I was like, okay, I get this now. If you do ask these people for anything, you're sunk. I didn't need to go deeper into that cave. So I would say for someone who says that I feel setting boundaries is unempathic and that people around you are telling you you're difficult for setting them, start internally first. Disengage. Say like, yeah, no, I don't know that I want to see this person on a Friday night after a busy week of work. Or yeah, maybe I don't need to spend a full day with this person or get into business with them. Or I see their name on my phone. Nah, it's been a long day. I don't need to answer that call. So there are all these different ways. And when you say, I'm not going to answer that call because I don't need this person talking at me for the next 45 minutes. That is a boundary. And I'm happy to get into a debate with anyone who's like, well, no, that's not setting a boundary. It's like you express it to the other person. That actually sounds like masochism to do it that way. When you sense it in yourself and you honor it within yourself, to me, that's the boundary that matters. None of us have to be any damn boundaries teacher to a bunch of antagonistic people who ain't going to listen to us in the first place. Start inside, go from there. And the right answer is that, listen, are there boundaries that could be potentially unreasonable that you ask for? Yeah, sure. If you say to someone, in order to get together with me, I need 6 weeks notice. And if you're going to cancel with me, I need 3 weeks notice, or you have to give me a gift certificate for dinner. I'm like, that's a little bit fussy. But the fact is, you know what could happen if that's your boundary? The other person can say, you know what? this doesn't work for me. Don't think that just because we want to set a boundary, the other person will honor it, but then it becomes like a volley. We set it, they will sit with it and see if they can honor that or not. And if they can't, then we can make a decision on how we're going to proceed in this relationship. Boundaries are not it's not kumbaya, folks. It's like, oh, y'all honor your boundaries so we could be together. Sometimes people ain't going to honor it. And when that happens, whether someone won't honor your boundary or you won't honor theirs, that becomes a moment of decision making for you, for that other person. But to shame another person's boundary, calling it difficult or calling it too demanding, nah. Nobody who wants to set a boundary is being unempathic. You're simply saying what works for you. It's about safety. It's about knowing yourself, but start with yourself first. It works like a charm. And again, you don't have to be someone else's therapist. Good luck with that.